Deep beneath the streets of Manhattan sits a fortress. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York holds over 6,300 tons of gold in its underground vaults. Almost none of that wealth belongs to the United States. For nearly a century, foreign central banks shipped their gold reserves across the ocean, operating on the belief that American soil was the single safest place on Earth to park sovereign wealth. Leaving a national treasure in another government's vault requires a massive leap of faith. You are betting the stability of your country on the host nation's commitment to international law and the guarantee that they will never use your assets as leverage. The post-World War II financial order relied on this collective psychological agreement. Trust in American neutrality functioned as the ultimate security protocol, and that trust is now fracturing. The anxiety began with warnings from specialists like Professor Stephen Strauss, who pointed to the increasingly erratic nature of American domestic politics. Strauss cautioned that under an America First agenda, the U.S. could behave as a superpower unbound by international norms. If the rules of the game changed, there would be nothing to stop Washington from simply seizing the foreign assets held in its vaults. This possibility prompted massive depositors to reconsider their exposure. Germany and Italy, the two largest holders of gold in the U.S., began demanding their bullion be shipped back to their own soil as quickly as possible. Foreign leaders arrived at a cold realization. Wealth locked in a foreign vault belongs to the host nation the moment they decide to change the laws. On February 24, 2022, Vladimir Putin launched the invasion of Ukraine. In a televised address, he warned the international community that any attempt to interfere would lead to consequences never before experienced in history. While Western allies avoided a direct military confrontation, they launched a retaliatory economic strike of absolute force. The G7 executed a coordinated maneuver to freeze over $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. The majority of this wealth was trapped in European digital clearinghouses like Belgium's Euroclear. This action shattered the concept of sovereign immunity, the long-standing rule that a national treasury's assets are off-limits during conflict. By locking a world power out of its own accounts, the G7 proved that digital reserves offer zero protection against political will. The Western financial system had been fully weaponized. For any nation holding digital reserves abroad, their national survival could now be erased with a single keystroke. Even with $300 billion frozen, the Russian central bank remained standing. Russia had protected itself by holding $132 billion in physical gold, stored entirely within vaults on its own territory. If the Kremlin had followed the standard international practice of storing that gold in New York or London, they would have been locked out of every single gram. For countries watching from the sidelines, the calculation changed instantly. A reserve you do not physically possess is merely a suggestion. True financial security now requires holding assets where no foreign power can touch them. Central banks worldwide watched a superpower's digital wealth vanish in a matter of days. The realization that their own accounts were equally exposed triggered a wave of defensive buying. The 2023 Invesco report found that central banks began purchasing gold at a record-breaking pace. They also changed what they were buying. This diagram compares paper gold, digital contracts and derivatives, to physical bars. Central banks are actively avoiding paper assets because they are ultimately just digital data that a foreign government can freeze. They are prioritizing physical metal they can hold in their own hands. The efficiency of digital finance has been exposed as a strategic vulnerability. Governments are now deciding that the convenience of global markets is not worth the sacrifice of sovereign control. Central banks began a massive repatriation effort, demanding their existing gold reserves be hauled out of foreign vaults and flown back home. This chart shows the migration scale. In 2020, half of the world's central banks stored gold domestically. By 2023, that number surged to 68%. The trend is accelerating. Projections show within 5 years, 74% of reserves will be stored within their home countries. The era of trusting Western financial neutrality has reached its end. Today, a nation's wealth is only as secure as the physical borders and the military power used to guard it. For decades, the global economy operated under the assumption that the United States was the world's most predictable financial partner, not because of its military, but because of its law. While systems like China's allow a central party to control all assets, the American model was built on a series of checks. Courts and the central bank operated independently, ensuring that even the president had limited reach over private and foreign wealth. This institutional consistency is why dozens of allied nations chose to store their most vital physical assets inside the United States. The status of the U.S. as a global safe haven depended on the belief that American institutions would always restrain the person sitting in the Oval Office. Most of that foreign wealth is concentrated 80 feet below the sidewalk in Lower Manhattan, inside the vaults of the New York Federal Reserve. Within these cages sit thousands of tons of gold belonging to foreign central banks. Among the largest depositors are two of America's European allies. Germany currently keeps 1,236 tons, or 36% of its entire national reserve, in this building. Italy has 1,055 tons stored here, representing 43% of its total gold wealth. As gold prices rise toward record highs, the combined value of the gold these two nations have stored in New York has climbed past $295 billion. This arrangement was once considered a standard strategic choice, but recent shifts in American political behavior have changed the risk profile for Berlin and Rome. The return of Donald Trump to the White House has reintroduced the madman theory of diplomacy, a deliberate effort to remain unpredictable to allies and adversaries. This approach is now testing the traditional limits of the U.S. government. With the legislative branch often aligned with the executive, the internal friction that once moderated presidential action has become less certain. That lack of restraint has already manifested in the form of abandoned trade deals and the threat of aggressive tariffs targeting European manufacturing. For the first time in the post-war era, European nations are weighing the fact that their primary financial reserve is physically located in a country that is becoming increasingly comfortable with unilateral executive power. The security of that gold relies on the Federal Reserve remaining a neutral custodian. Its structure is designed to keep it separate from the political goals of the White House. However, the president has publicly challenged this separation, calling for more executive influence over the central bank's decisions and its leadership. This political pressure is focused directly on Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, whose term ends in 2026, creating a window for the administration to install a more compliant successor. If the Federal Reserve loses its independence, the $295 billion in foreign gold would sit directly under the influence of the executive branch. That possibility is already creating friction in Europe. Taxpayer associations are now petitioning their central banks to repatriate the gold before political conditions in the U.S. change further. In Germany, members of parliament are calling for immediate physical audits of the New York vaults to verify that their 1,200 tons are still present and accessible. In Italy, the dilemma has become a political liability for Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Before taking office, she was a vocal critic of keeping Italian wealth abroad, promising to bring it home. Since becoming Prime Minister, however, she has avoided the subject entirely. The silence is a strategic necessity. Requesting a mass withdrawal of gold would signal a lack of trust in the Trump administration, potentially triggering the very trade wars and tariffs Italy is trying to avoid. These gold reserves, once a symbol of financial security, now function as a $295 billion diplomatic lever held by the United States. The most significant risk for Europe is the potential for the executive branch to use foreign-held assets as collateral in a political dispute. Economists have noted the U.S. government doesn't need to seize the gold to make it unusable. It only needs to provide a legal justification to freeze the account. An administration could cite unpaid defense contributions, NATO targets, or trade imbalances as a pretext to hold the gold. This led analysts like Professor Strauss to advise central banks that the only way to eliminate risk is moving assets out of the U.S. immediately. For allied nations, the internal rules that once protected their wealth in New York are no longer considered a guarantee against executive action. This is a classic case of counterparty risk. In the eyes of many foreign finance ministers, the United States is moving from being the world's safest custodian toward becoming a source of financial instability. The assumption that New York is a neutral vault is being reevaluated, forcing allies to consider the cost of keeping national treasure in American hands. The question remains, If Germany or Italy requested the immediate return of their 2,291 tons of gold tomorrow, would the United States actually let it leave the building?